The crack of the whip cut through the stale summer air as Jane Sutton fell to her knees, dust billowing around her thin frame on the barren yard of Holloway Ranch. It was 1878 in the unforgiving territory of West Texas, and mercy was a commodity as scarce as water in these parts. Her crime was simple: being too weak to haul the 50-pound sacks of feed across the ranch after 3 days without proper food or rest. "Get up, girl. You ain't earned your keep today or yesterday." Vernon Holloway's voice boomed across the yard as ranch hands lowered their eyes, none brave enough to intervene. Jane's dress, once white but now stained with blood and dirt, clung to her back as tears silently streamed down her sunburnt face. At 22, Jane had already lived several lifetimes of suffering. Orphaned at 16 and forced to work as an indentured servant to pay her deceased parents' debts, she had been sold to Holloway Ranch 6 months ago with promises of fair work and eventual freedom. Those promises had proven as hollow as Holloway's rotten heart. "I'm sorry, sir." "I'll try harder," Jane whispered, her voice cracked from thirst as she attempted to stand, only to collapse again. Her body, worn from malnourishment and exhaustion, had finally betrayed her. Holloway raised his arm for another strike when the sound of approaching hoofbeats interrupted the grim scene. A lone rider appeared on the horizon, silhouetted against the setting sun. The figure approached steadily, unrushed yet purposeful, until the features of Samuel Cooper became clear to all who watched. Everyone in Chico, Texas knew of Samuel Cooper, though few could claim to truly know him. At 28, he'd earned a reputation as a fair but reticent cattleman who kept mostly to himself on his modest spread 10 miles outside town. Some said he'd fought in the war, others claimed he'd once ridden with a Texas Ranger company. Whatever the truth, he carried himself with the quiet confidence of a man who'd seen enough of the world's cruelty to avoid adding to it. "Afternoon, Holloway." Sam's deep voice was calm as he dismounted, dust rising from his worn leather boots. His eyes, steel gray beneath the shadow of his hat, took in the scene with methodical precision before settling on Jane's crumpled form. "This ain't your concern, Cooper," Holloway spat, whip still clutched in his meaty hand. "Just dealing with a lazy worker." Sam moved his duster aside, revealing the Colt .45 holstered at his hip. "Not a threat, merely a reminder. Seems to me she's more dead than lazy." His words carried no emotion, yet somehow filled the space between them with tension. "You looking to buy trouble?" Holloway's face reddened beneath his unkempt beard. "No, looking to buy her contract." Sam pulled a leather pouch from his vest. "I need help at my place, willing to pay what you're owed plus 10%. Holloway's eyes narrowed with suspicion but glinted with greed. 20%. 15, Sam countered, "and I don't mention to Sheriff Taylor how you treat your workers." The standoff lasted only moments before Holloway snatched the money, counted it quickly, and tossed a folded paper at Sam's feet. "Take the worthless girl, she'll be dead within the week anyway." Sam carefully tucked the contract into his vest before approaching Jane. She flinched as his shadow fell across her, expecting another blow. "Madam," he said softly, removing his bandana and offering it to her. "Can you stand?" Jane stared at his outstretched hand with disbelief and fear. "What's happening?" "Your contract's been transferred to me. My ranch needs help." Sam kept his voice level, aware of the spectators. "You're free to refuse, but I can promise food, fair work, and no whip." Jane searched his face for deception, but found only steady patience. With trembling fingers, she accepted his hand. "I don't have much choice, do I, sir?" Something flickered in Sam's eyes, perhaps regret that her trust had been so thoroughly broken by men like Holloway. "There's always a choice, and the name's Sam Cooper, not sir." With surprising gentleness, he helped her onto his horse before mounting behind her, careful not to touch her injured back. As they rode away from Holloway Ranch, Jane's body tensed with each hoofbeat, waiting for the moment this stranger's kindness would reveal itself as just another cruel deception. The ride to Cooper's ranch passed in silence. Jane drifting between consciousness and fevered dreams. The terrain gradually shifted from flat, dusty plains to rolling hills with patches of hardy grasses and scattered oak trees. When they finally crested a small rise, Jane glimpsed a modest homestead nestled against a backdrop of cottonwoods along what appeared to be a creek. Unlike the sprawling, neglected Holloway property, this ranch bore signs of careful attention. The fences stood straight, the barn was well maintained, and a small garden plot sat adjacent to a simple two-story house built of local stone and timber. "Welcome to Willow Creek Ranch," Sam said, his deep voice startling Jane from her observations. "It's green," she managed, the words scratching her parched throat. A barely perceptible smile touched Sam's lips. "Underground spring feeds the creek year-round makes all the difference out here." As they approached the house, an elderly Mexican woman emerged onto the porch, wiping her hands on a worn apron. Her face creased with concern as she saw Jane slumped against Sam. "Mater de Dios, Samuel, what have you brought home now?" The woman hurried down the steps despite her age. "Rosa, this is Jane Sutton. She needs medical attention and rest." Sam dismounted carefully before helping Jane down. "Jane, this is Rosa Mendez. She keeps house here and makes sure I don't completely forget my manners." Rosa clicked her tongue disapprovingly as she examined Jane's condition. "Those Holloway devils, I told you something was not right there." She gently took Jane's arm. "Come, Nina, let's get you cleaned up and tended to." Jane hesitated, looking back at Sam with uncertainty. What will be expected of me here?" Understanding darkened Sam's features. "Nothing until you're healed. After that, just help with cooking, cleaning, and whatever ranch work you're comfortable with. You'll have your own room with a lock on the door." The significance of that last detail wasn't lost on Jane. She nodded slightly and allowed Rosa to guide her toward the house. "The girl is half-starved and beaten," Rosa muttered to Sam in Spanish, assuming Jane couldn't understand. "What kind of monster does this?" "The kind that won't be doing it anymore," Sam replied in the same language, his tone carrying a rare edge of anger. To their surprise, Jane responded in halting but clear Spanish. "Gracias por su ayuda." "Thank you for your help." Rosa's expression softened immediately. "Ah, you speak Spanish. Good, good. Now we can talk while this grumpy man is out with his cattle." She shot Sam an affectionate glance before continuing to help Jane inside. The interior of the Cooper house was modest but comfortable, far from luxurious, yet clean and orderly. Rosa led Jane to a small bedroom on the first floor, explaining that Sam's room was upstairs and that this space had originally belonged to his mother. "I'll bring hot water for a bath," Rosa said, helping Jane sit on the edge of the bed. "Those wounds need cleaning." Jane nodded, overwhelmed by the sudden change in her circumstances. "Why did he buy my contract? Men don't just help women like me without wanting something." Rosa's dark eyes studied Jane carefully. "Samuel Cooper is not most men. He has his reasons for helping, and they're not what you're thinking." She patted Jane's hand. "Rest now. Questions will wait until you're stronger." Over the next several days, Jane drifted in and out of fever as her body fought infection from the lacerations on her back. Rosa tended to her with herbal poultices and gentle hands, while Sam remained a shadowy presence, checking in briefly, but mostly keeping his distance. On the fourth morning, Jane woke with a clear head for the first time. Sunlight streamed through the small window, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. She sat up gingerly, surprised to find her pain significantly diminished. A soft knock at the door preceded Rosa's entrance with a tray of food. "Ah, your eyes are bright today. The fever has broken." She set the tray down, a bowl of fragrant stew, fresh bread, and a cup of coffee. "Eat slowly. Your stomach needs to remember how." Jane nodded gratefully. "How long have I been here?" 4 days. Samuel has been worried, though he pretends otherwise. Rosa arranged Jane's pillows to help her sit more comfortably. "He checks on you each night after he thinks I'm asleep." Heat rose to Jane's cheeks at this revelation. "I've been a burden." "Nonsense. This house needed a young woman's presence." Rosa smiled mysteriously. When you're ready, there are clean clothes in the chest. Samuel brought them from town yesterday, had Mrs. Wilson at the general store help choose proper sizes. Jane fingered the simple cotton nightgown she wore, realizing someone had bathed and changed her during her fever. Embarrassment flooded her, but Rosa seemed to read her thoughts. "Do not worry, Nina. Only I have tended to you that way. Samuel is a gentleman." She bustled about the room, opening the window slightly to let in fresh air. "Perhaps tomorrow you might sit on the porch if you feel strong enough. The fresh air will do you good." After finishing her meal, the most satisfying food Jane had tasted in months, she found the strength to wash herself properly with the basin Rosa provided. The clothes in the chest were simple but well made. 2 calico dresses, undergarments, a nightgown, and even a shawl for cooler evenings. Dressed in a blue calico that complemented her hazel eyes, Jane ventured hesitantly into the main room of the house for the first time. Rosa looked up from her baking with approval. "Much better. You look like a proper young lady now, not a scarecrow." She wiped flour from her hands. "Samuel is mending fences in the north pasture. He'll be back for supper." Jane moved toward the kitchen area. "Please, let me help." "I need to earn my keep." Rosa evaluated her with a critical eye. "You may set the table, but no heavy work until those wounds are truly healed." She handed Jane 3 simple ceramic plates. "And Jane, in this house people don't earn their keep, they contribute what they can when they can." The concept was foreign to Jane, who had spent years measuring her worth through labor. She arranged the table carefully, taking pleasure in the simple task. Through the window, she caught glimpses of the ranch cattle grazing in the distance, chickens scratching in the yard, and a vegetable garden that promised summer bounty. The sound of boots on the porch announced Sam's return just as the sun began to set. He paused in the doorway, clearly surprised to see Jane up and about. "Miss Sutton," he nodded, removing his hat. "Good to see you on your feet." Jane lowered her gaze. "Thank you for your kindness, Mr. Cooper." An awkward silence stretched between them until Rosa broke it with characteristic directness. "Samuel, wash up. Jane, the biscuits need watching. Both of you stop standing there like fence posts." The meal was simple but delicious: beef stew, fresh biscuits, and early summer greens from the garden. Jane ate sparingly despite Rosa's encouragement, still unaccustomed to regular food. Conversation flowed mostly between Rosa and Sam, discussing ranch matters and local news, occasionally drawing Jane in with a direct question. "Sheriff Taylor rode by Henderson's place," Sam mentioned between bites. "Seems Holloway's been telling folks you ran off, Miss Sutton." Jane's spoon clattered against her plate. "He's looking for me." "No," Sam's voice was firm. "I showed Taylor your contract this morning when he stopped by. Everything's legal and clear." He hesitated before adding, "But folks in town are curious. They'll talk." "They always do," Rosa muttered. "Small minds with nothing better to fill them." "Will I need to go to town?" Jane asked, fear evident in her voice. Sam studied her carefully. "Not until you're ready." "But hiding forever isn't practical either." "I'm not hiding." Jane straightened her shoulders despite the pain. "I just need time." Something like admiration flickered in Sam's eyes. "Time you'll have. Your contract gives you a year here, but I want to be clear you're free to leave whenever you choose. I'll sign your release papers." Jane blinked in confusion. "But you paid good money. For your freedom, not your servitude." Sam's tone left no room for argument. He stood abruptly, plate in hand. "Thank you for supper, Rosa. I need to check the new calf in the barn." After he left, Jane helped Rosa clear the table, her mind spinning with questions. "He's an unusual man." Rosa smiled knowingly. "Samuel Cooper came back from the war changed, saw too much death," he said. "Now he values all life more than most." She handed Jane a dish to dry. "His parents died 3 years ago. Fever took them both within days of each other. He's been alone since, except for my visits to help with the house." "You don't live here?" Jane asked, surprised. "My home is in town with my son's family. I come 3 days a week." Rosa pointed to a small clock on the mantel, Which reminds me, I should be going. Juan will be waiting with the wagon. But I can't, Jane began, panic rising at the thought of being alone with Sam. Rosa patted her hand reassuringly. You'll be fine. Samuel sleeps in the barn most nights anyway. She gathered her shawl and basket. I'll be back the day after tomorrow. Rest, eat, and don't worry so much. After Rosa departed, Jane found herself alone in the quiet house. The thought of climbing the stairs to check on Sam in the barn crossed her mind, but exhaustion from her first day up soon overcame her curiosity. She retired to her room, turning the small key in the lock before settling into bed. Despite her fatigue, sleep eluded her as she contemplated her situation. For the first time in years, she had a safe place to rest and heal, yet the habits of constant vigilance were not easily broken. Every creak of the house settling made her tense. Every distant sound from outside sharpened her senses. Eventually, heavy footsteps on the porch followed by the soft opening and closing of the front door told her Sam had returned from the barn. She heard him move around briefly before silence fell over the house again. Only then did she finally drift into a dreamless sleep. The following days established a cautious routine. Jane's strength returned gradually, allowing her to take on light household duties despite Rosa and Sam's insistence that she focus on healing. She discovered a rhythm to ranch life: the pre-dawn breakfast preparations, the midday lull when the Texas heat drove man and beast to seek shade, and the peaceful evenings when Sam would sometimes sit on the porch cleaning tack or carving wood while she mended clothes nearby. They rarely spoke beyond pleasantries and necessary conversation, but the silence between them grew more comfortable with each passing day. Jane noticed how Sam would leave wildflowers on the kitchen table after his morning rides, how he built a small bench beneath the oak tree where she liked to sit, and how he always made sure the water bucket was filled before she needed it. 2 weeks after her arrival, Jane was hanging laundry when she noticed a rider approaching. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she dropped the wet sheet back into the basket and hurried toward the house. Sam emerged from the barn, Winchester rifle in hand, but his posture relaxed as he recognized the visitor. "It's just Doc Wilson," he called to Jane, noting her frightened expression. The elderly doctor dismounted with a grunt, securing his horse to the hitching post. "Cooper," he nodded to Sam before tipping his hat to Jane. "Miss Sutton, I presume? Rosa mentioned you might need my professional opinion on those injuries." Jane hesitated in the doorway, but Sam's reassuring nod persuaded her to approach. "I'm healing well enough, doctor." "Let me be the judge of that," Wilson replied kindly. "I've been doctoring folks in this county for 30 years, seen all manner of wounds and their aftereffects." With Sam tactfully retreating to the barn, Jane allowed Dr. Wilson to examine her back in the privacy of her room. His gentle hands and matter-of-fact manner put her at ease despite her discomfort with the situation. "Healing nicely, but you'll have scars," he concluded, replacing her dress over the healing wounds. "No signs of infection now. Rosa's poultices did their work." He rummaged in his medical bag, producing a small tin. "This salve will help with the scarring. Apply it morning and night." Jane accepted the tin gratefully. "Thank you, doctor. What do I owe you?" Wilson chuckled. "Nothing, my dear. Cooper already settled your account when he came to town last week." He snapped his bag closed. "Now, about your general health, you're still underweight and showing signs of prolonged malnourishment. Plenty of rest, good food, and moderate activity for at least another month." After the doctor departed, Jane found Sam in the vegetable garden, methodically pulling weeds from between rows of young corn plants. She approached hesitantly, the tin of salve clutched in her hand. "Dr. Wilson said you paid for his visit," she began, unsure how to express her gratitude. Sam continued working, not looking up. "Seemed the proper thing to do. I'm not accustomed to kindness without expectation." Jane knelt across from him, setting aside the tin to help with the weeding. "I don't understand why you're doing all this." Sam's hands stilled, but his eyes remained fixed on the earth. During the war, I was captured at Gettysburg, spent 8 months in a Confederate prison camp. His voice held no emotion, yet Jane sensed the weight behind his words. Men can become animals when they're treated as such long enough. He finally looked up, meeting her gaze directly. When I got out, I weighed 90 pounds and couldn't walk without help. An old farmer and his wife took me in, nursed me back to health. Never asked for payment, never expected anything in return. And now you're doing the same for me, Jane said softly. All I'm doing is passing along a kindness that was once shown to me. Sam resumed his weeding. Nothing more complicated than that. But as weeks turned to months, Jane recognized there was indeed something more complicated developing between them. It emerged in small moments, the way Sam's eyes lingered on her when she laughed with Rosa, how he began finding reasons to return to the house during the day, the books of poetry he brought her from his mother's collection. By midsummer, Jane had gained healthy weight and color. Her hands, once delicate from indoor work, grew calloused from gardening and helping with ranch chores. She learned to ride the gentle mare Sam had designated as hers, discovered she had a talent for baking that delighted both Sam and Rosa, and slowly began to feel a sense of belonging she'd never experienced before. Yet beneath this growing contentment lay uncertainty about her future. Her contract would end in months, and while Sam had made it clear she could stay longer if she wished, Jane feared becoming a burden or misreading his intentions. The situation came to a head one August evening when a sudden thunderstorm caught them both by surprise. They had ridden to the north pasture to check on a downed fence and were halfway back when the sky opened. Rain poured in blinding sheets as lightning fractured the darkened sky. "The line shack's closer than the house," Sam shouted over the downpour, steering his horse toward a small structure nestled among a stand of oak trees. The one-room shack was sparsely furnished but dry, with a small fireplace, narrow cot, and basic provisions for emergencies just like this one. Sam worked quickly to start a fire while Jane wrung water from her hair and skirts. "You're shivering," he observed, concern evident in his voice. He shrugged out of his duster and draped it around her shoulders. "It's not much, but it's dry." The small space made their proximity unavoidable as Sam moved to check the shack's single window. Jane became acutely aware of him in a way she'd been trying to ignore: the breadth of his shoulders, the quiet strength in his movements, the scent of leather and pine that seemed to cling to him. "Thank you," she said, drawing the coat tighter around herself. "For everything, not just this." Sam turned, firelight casting half his face in shadow. "You don't need to keep thanking me, Jane." It was the first time he'd used her given name without the formal Miss Sutton preceding it. The intimacy of it hung in the air between them. "I do, though," she persisted. "You saved my life, gave me purpose again. I was nothing when you found me. You were never nothing." His voice held an intensity she'd never heard before. "Holloway tried to break you, but he couldn't." "That strength was always in you." Jane shook her head, stepping closer to the fire and to him. "I was dying, I'd given up. Yet here you stand." Sam's eyes held hers. "Do you know what I saw that day at Holloway's ranch? Not just a woman being mistreated. I saw defiance in your eyes even as you knelt in the dirt." Jane hadn't realized how close they'd moved toward each other until she had to tilt her head back to maintain eye contact. "I don't feel defiant. Most days I still feel afraid." "Of what?" Sam asked softly. "Of this ending." The admission cost her, but Jane continued. "Of what happens when my contract is fulfilled, of misunderstanding what's growing between us." Sam's hand rose slowly, telegraphing his movement to give her time to retreat. When she didn't, his calloused fingers gently brushed a strand of damp hair from her cheek. "There's no misunderstanding, Jane, but I won't rush you or pressure you. You've had enough of men making decisions about your life." The tenderness in his touch undid her. Tears welled in her eyes, not from sadness but from the overwhelming relief of being truly seen. "I don't want to leave when my contract ends, not ever." Sam's other hand came up to cradle her face. "Then stay, not as an employee or a contract worker. Stay because you want to." And what would I be? Jane whispered, needing clarity despite the emotions threatening to overwhelm her. Whatever you choose, my partner, my wife, my friend. Sam's thumbs gently wiped away the tears tracking down her cheeks. Just be Jane, that's all I've ever wanted. The confession hung between them for a heartbeat before Jane closed the final distance, rising on her toes to press her lips to his. The kiss was tentative at first, a question rather than a demand. But as Sam's arms encircled her waist with exquisite care for her healing back, it deepened into something more certain. When they finally parted, both breathless, the storm outside had begun to abate. Rain still drummed on the roof, but the thunder had retreated to distant rumbles. I should be shocked at my boldness, Jane murmured against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. Sam's laugh vibrated beneath her ear. I've never known you to be anything but bold, Jane Sutton. From the moment you took my hand at Holloway's, you've been making your own choices. They remained in the lined shack until the rain stopped completely, talking more openly than ever before. Sam spoke of his time in the war, the nightmares that still occasionally plagued him, and his parents' dream for the ranch. Jane shared memories of her childhood before her parents' deaths, her passion for books and learning, and her hopes for someday having a family of her own. By the time they rode back to the main house, twilight was settling over the land, painting the rain-washed landscape in purples and golds. The air between them had changed, charged with possibility and unspoken promises. The following weeks brought a blossoming courtship conducted under Rosa's approving eye. Sam began taking Jane to town on Sundays for church services, publicly establishing her position not as his employee but as his companion. Though whispers followed them at first, Jane held her head high, refusing to be defined by her past. On a crisp October morning, Jane rode with Sam to a secluded spot along the creek where ancient cottonwoods created a natural cathedral. He spread a blanket beneath the largest tree, now resplendent in autumn gold, and produced a picnic basket packed by Rosa. I've been wanting to show you this place, Sam said as they settled on the blanket. My father proposed to my mother here. Said the trees were witnesses to their vows before God even made them official. Jane's heart quickened as she recognized the significance of the location. It's beautiful. Sam reached into his pocket, withdrawing a small wooden box polished to a soft glow. I've been carving this for weeks, he admitted, opening it to reveal a ring fashioned from silver and inlaid with a small piece of turquoise. It's not fancy like store-bought rings, but it's perfect, Jane interrupted, tears welling in her eyes. Did you make the ring too? Sam nodded, uncharacteristic nervousness evident in his expression. Used silver from my mother's old brooch. She would have wanted you to have it. He took her hand gently. Jane Sutton, I never expected to find someone who would bring light back into my life. But from the moment you started healing here, not just your body, but your spirit, this ranch began to feel like a home again instead of just a place. His voice deepened with emotion. I'm asking if you do me the honor of becoming my wife, my partner in all things. Jane could barely speak through her tears, but her yes was clear and certain. As Sam slipped the ring onto her finger, she felt the final pieces of her old fear falling away, replaced by a sense of belonging she'd thought forever beyond her reach. They were married 2 weeks later in the small white church in Chico, with Rosa beaming from the front pew and Doc Wilson giving the bride away. The town turned out in force, some from genuine goodwill, others from curiosity, but Jane cared only for the man waiting for her at the altar, his usually solemn face transformed by a smile that reached all the way to his eyes. The ceremony was simple, the celebration afterward lively with music and dancing. As evening approached, the newlyweds slipped away to begin their life together at Willow Creek Ranch, no longer as rescuer and rescued, but as equal partners in the life they would build. Their wedding night revealed new dimensions to both of them. Sam's gentleness gave Jane the confidence to overcome her fears of intimacy, while her trust allowed him to lower the careful guard he'd maintained for so long. In the privacy of the upstairs bedroom, now theirs together, they discovered a language beyond words to express what had been growing between them since that first day. "I never thought I'd feel safe again," Jane whispered in the pre-dawn hours, nestled against Sam's chest. "Much less loved." Sam's fingers traced lazy patterns along her spine, carefully avoiding the scars that would always mark her back. "You'll never lack for either as long as I'm breathing," he promised. Fall gave way to winter, bringing cozy evenings by the fire and the shared labor of preparing the ranch for the cold months. Jane's natural intelligence found outlet in keeping the ranch books, discovering a talent for numbers that soon had her suggesting improvements to operations that increased their modest profits. When spring arrived, it brought news that filled the ranch with joyful anticipation. Jane was expecting their first child. Sam's reaction, dropping to his knees to press his ear against her still flat stomach, became one of Jane's most treasured memories. "A baby," he whispered in awe. "Our baby." The pregnancy progressed well, with Rosa practically moving in to ensure Jane had proper care and rest. Sam divided his time between ranch work and crafting a cradle from cedar wood, carving intricate designs of Texas wildflowers along its sides. Their son arrived on a stormy September night with Doc Wilson attending and Rosa boiling endless kettles of water. After hours of labor, Jane's exhausted cries gave way to the lusty wails of a healthy boy with his father's gray eyes and a tuft of his mother's auburn hair. "James Samuel Cooper," Jane announced when Sam was finally allowed into the bedroom, his face pale with worry until he saw her tired but radiant smile. "After both our fathers." Sam took his son with trembling hands, overwhelmed by emotions he couldn't begin to name. "Hello, James," he whispered. "You're the luckiest boy alive to have your mother's strength." As Jane watched her husband cradle their child, she reflected on the journey that had brought her here from the brutal yard of Holloway Ranch to this moment of perfect belonging. The scars on her back would remain forever, but they no longer defined her. Instead, they served as reminders of her survival and the unexpected path that led to happiness. When little James was christened in the Chico church, a surprise visitor approached the family afterward, Sheriff Taylor, looking uncomfortable in his Sunday best. "Mrs. Cooper," he nodded respectfully to Jane, "thought you might want to know that Vernon Holloway's been arrested in El Paso. Seems his treatment of workers caught up with him when he nearly beat a young man to death." Jane clutched James closer to her chest. "Will they need me to testify?" "No, madam, plenty of witnesses this time." Taylor shifted his weight. "But I thought knowing he was facing justice might give you some peace." Sam's arm tightened around Jane's shoulders. "Thank you, Sheriff. We appreciate you bringing the news." As the lawman departed, Jane looked up at her husband. "It doesn't change what happened, but knowing he can't hurt anyone else does help." "You helped make that possible," Sam reminded her. "The complaint I filed after bringing you home started people talking. You were brave enough to let Doc Wilson document your injuries." Small actions have ripples, Jane. The years that followed brought both joys and challenges to Willow Creek Ranch. A severe drought tested their resilience during their third year of marriage, followed by a devastating winter that claimed several of their cattle. Yet through it all, the foundation they had built remained unshaken. Their family grew with the addition of twin daughters, Elizabeth and Catherine, when James was 4 years old. The house expanded as well, with Sam adding rooms to accommodate their growing family and eventually building a separate cottage for Rosa, who refused to return full-time to her son's home in town. "My place is here," the older woman insisted. "With these children and you two stubborn people who would work yourselves to death without me." By the time James was 10, Willow Creek Ranch had developed a reputation throughout the county for its fine horses, which Jane had convinced Sam to raise alongside the cattle. Her eye for good bloodlines, and his skill with training produced animals sought after by ranchers throughout Texas. On the 10th anniversary of the day Sam had brought Jane home, they hosted a celebration that brought together friends and neighbors from miles around. Tables laden with food stretched across the yard, music filled the air, and children darted between adults in games of tag. As twilight approached, Sam found Jane standing alone by the creek, watching the water flow past in eternal patience. "Penny for your thoughts, Mrs. Cooper," he said softly, coming to stand beside her. Jane leaned into his embrace, still marveling at how completely safe she felt in his arms. "I was just thinking about that day, how close I came to never experiencing any of this." She gestured toward their home, where laughter and music spilled from every window. "One different decision, yours or mine, and none of this would exist." Sam pressed a kiss to her temple. "I believe we would have found each other somehow. Some things are meant to be." Jane turned in his arms, studying the face that had become more dear to her with each passing year. The lines at his eyes had deepened. Threads of silver now wove through his dark hair, but his gaze still held the same steady warmth that had given her hope when she had none. "I used to dream of escape," she confessed. "During those months at Holloway's, I'd close my eyes and imagine running away, finding some peaceful corner where no one could hurt me." Her hands came up to frame his face. "I never dreamed of this, of love, family, belonging. I didn't know enough to even wish for it. And now," Sam asked, his voice husky with emotion, "now I know that healing isn't just about mended wounds and faded scars." Jane smiled up at him. "It's about building something new and beautiful where there was once only pain. It's about finding strength in vulnerability and courage in loving someone enough to let them love you back." From the house, their children's voices called them to return to the celebration. James, with his serious nature so like his father's, Elizabeth with her quick wit, and Catherine with her boundless energy. The demands of parenthood broke the moment, but not before Sam captured Jane's lips in a kiss that held all the passion of their beginning and all the depth of their years together. As they walked hand in hand back toward the lights of home, Jane thought about the frightened, broken woman she had been and the journey that had brought her here. The whip that had once cut her flesh had also, in its way, driven her toward this life she could never have imagined. "What are you smiling about?" Sam asked, squeezing her hand. "Just counting blessings," Jane replied, leaning her head against his shoulder, "and finding there are far too many to count." In the years that followed, the Cooper family weathered the changing face of Texas as the frontier gradually gave way to civilization. James grew up to study law in Austin before returning to help protect the rights of workers throughout the state. The twins followed different paths, Elizabeth becoming a teacher in the Chico schoolhouse, while Catherine inherited her father's love of ranching and eventually took over management of Willow Creek. Through it all, Sam and Jane remained the heart of the family and the community that grew around them. Their story became something of a legend in Chico, the tale of a broken woman and a quiet cowboy who together created something whole and lasting from the fragments of their separate pasts. On their 30th anniversary, with their children and grandchildren gathered around them, Sam presented Jane with a journal bound in soft leather. "What's this?" she asked, running her fingers over the cover. "Our story," Sam replied. "I've been writing it down bit by bit over the years, so our grandchildren and their children will know where they came from." He smiled at her questioning look. "Rosa helped with the early parts I wasn't there for." That night, after the celebration had ended and the house grew quiet, Jane sat on their porch and opened the journal. Sam's neat handwriting filled page after page, chronicling not just the events of their life together, but the emotions that had shaped their journey. The final entry, dated that very day, brought tears to her eyes. 30 years ago today, I brought home a woman who thought herself broken beyond repair. I thought I was offering her healing, not realizing how much healing I needed myself. What neither of us understood then was that the greatest healing doesn't come from being rescued, it comes from finding purpose, from being needed, from loving and being loved in return. Jane didn't need a hero. She needed a partner willing to walk beside her as she reclaimed her own strength. In giving her space to heal, I found my own wounds mending. In watching her rebuild herself, I discovered parts of myself I thought lost to war and grief. If there's wisdom to be passed to our children and theirs, it's this: true strength isn't found in never falling or never being broken. It's found in rising again, in helping others rise, and in creating something beautiful from what once was shattered. As the Texas stars spread their ancient light across the sky, Jane closed the journal and looked out over the land that had become their legacy. From the darkest moment of her life had come this abundance not just of prosperity or family, but of love that had transformed them both. The scars on her back had faded to silvery lines over the decades, touchable reminders of where she had begun. But it was the invisible marks, the ones left by Sam's kindness, their children's laughter, and her own discovered strength that had truly written the story of her life. Jane Cooper had been whipped for being too weak to work, but in the end, it was that very vulnerability that had led her to a quiet cowboy and the place where both of them could heal together.